I am so excited to chat with Kevin Newman, who's co-founder of Get Fact. Kevin, thank you so much for being here.
Amber, it's a pleasure. Good to see you again.
Okay, so I want to talk about Get Fact, but I also just want to introduce you to people who maybe aren't familiar with your very long career as a journalist. So tell us a little bit about your background before we get into what you're doing today.
Sure thing. I mean, I retired 5 years ago from CTV's W5, which is an investigative show in Canada, a little bit like 60 Minutes. And before that, I had a 4-decade-long career as a network anchor at ABC News in the United States. I was for a very brief amount of time, believe it or not, the host of Good Morning America. I said good morning to like 21 million people every day. And then I came home to Canada in 2001 and started a third national newscast called Global National, which I did for a decade. And along the way, I've always sort of had an interest in this intersection between technology and media and technology and journalism, as of course we're riding this wave of massive change in the information atmosphere. And so that's how I landed here. I got off my retirement couch in the back here, and along with Wilf Dinnick, who I've known from our days at Global National 20 years ago, we've created this startup.
Let's talk about the startup. It is called Get Fact, and you're doing incredible things. You are just launching. So what was the reason behind wanting to launch what is really a community, but also you have a lot of technology baked in?
Yeah, so it was really President Trump's suddenly taking aim at Canada, to be honest. It was when he started talking about the tariffs, brought the tariffs in for a little while, took them off, put them in, took them off, they're in, and then started talking about Canada as a 51st state. And I thought to myself, I'd been aware, in my reporting and in my friendship groups about, how important misinformation has become in our information ecosphere here, and just how dominant it's become and how dominant conspiratorial thinking has become in Canada, almost at the same level as it is in the United States. And so when the president started talking that way about Canada, I thought, ooh, if you add sort of his supporters in the United States, perhaps even, although we have no evidence of this yet, the elements of the American state to the misinformation that we're already having in Canada that's aimed at us from Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, that's a substantial increase in what could happen here. So Wilf and I were talking, and we said, like, we have to do something here. Like, there is some fact checking in the Canadian journalism circles, but it tends to not be rapid response. It tends to be it takes a few days. It's written. Very little of it is in the video sphere, and so we thought maybe the skills that we have combined. Both of us were television reporters, worked for American networks. Wilf worked at CNN as well as ABC. We thought maybe the skills that we have sort of put aside for a while have a reason for being again. And those skills are, being able to synthesize information quickly, check the facts of something, and then turn around a video response to that in real time on a daily deadline.
So I absolutely want to talk more about some of the tools that you're going to have as well, like an AI bot. But I wanted to kind of pull out this sentence that you wrote in a Substack, because I think it's really important for people to understand. Most Canadians, I think they know that news is blocked on Facebook and Instagram. Some of our friends south of the border may not know, but you wrote this sentence, which I think is so relevant in terms of what's happening today. A scam that can be posted on Facebook in Canada while the real CBC news cannot. What impact does this have in terms of some of these big social media sites blocking access to legitimate journalism?
It has been profound in Canada. The McGill Center for Democracy, I think, estimates that 11 million fewer exposures to real news in Canada just in 1 month. So, there's been a degradation in the news environment in Canada because of that. People don't necessarily realize it. They think they're getting more news, but what they're actually getting is more information and more opinion. We've kind of lost, in the same way that Xerox lost its brand to copying, right? You would say, we're going to Xerox something, meaning we're going to photocopy it. We've kind of lost the brand of news in Canada. People think news is things that they see on Instagram or things that influencers say. And it's not. That's information, but it's not news. It's not verified by multiple sources. So, I think that's part of what we're seeing. And we're seeing, even since the last election, we have an election going on in Canada right now. Even since the last election, the amount of consumption of what I would call sort of mainstream news, and that's newspapers and the networks, has gone down, 5 to 10%. And so we are living in an environment where there is less verified information, and that's something that we're hoping to address.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the measures to address these issues with misinformation and disinformation, because from what I've read so far, like I mentioned, there's an AI bot, there's a podcast, there are many different avenues. So what's the plan?
So the plan is to provide a portal for fact checking. And that portal will have 4 different channels. You mentioned a couple of them. One is this a podcast, which I've done the first episode on, and it's for longer conversations like this. We've got a new daily newsletter that we've been pumping out for a couple of weeks already that's getting good traction off Substack. We've got what I talked about, the content, and the content piece is we have about 100 volunteers, former television reporters, editors, graphic artists, researchers from universities who are coming together to put out videos on TikTok that will fact check the misinformation that's spreading on those places. So that's the video content element. But the real groundbreaking one, and the one we're frankly still struggling with, is a fact-checking bot. And the reason we think that matters is there's, as I said, a lot of the fact-checking that's going on in journalism currently is longer form. It's something you would sit down, you would read, on a laptop, let's say. But we thought we needed something that was faster. And a lot of people are using ChatGPT now to fact-check. And so they're getting into the habit of using AI already and language models to try to verify information and search for it. What we wanted to create was a bot that had the guardrails of established journalism prompted into it. So what we took the ethical guidelines from a couple of newsrooms that I've worked in, the ethical guidelines, the international guidelines on fact checking, on transparency, and how you go about verifying the validity of certain sources. And we prompted the LLM with that so that it would return an assessment of a story or a link that you would put into the search line and give you an assessment of what information has been verified, what information is partially verified, what information can't be verified, and what information there's just not enough context around to know. So the tricky thing with bots, as you know, Amber, is that they are kind of programmed to please us. They really want to provide an answer, even if sometimes that answer isn't right or has nuances that are wrong. So one of the things we had to be careful of, and we're still working with, and it will be an ongoing process, is teaching our bot to play in the gray. Don't be so determined to have a black and white answer. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know, or if there's nuances you're unsure of, say them, because that's ultimately what verification of journalism is like. We're trying to transfer, decades and centuries worth of journalistic practices and ethics into an LLM and see what comes out.
It's interesting. I was reading about the fact-checking bot. It is called Laura, if that is still the plan, and it is after Laura Secord. Tell me a little bit behind why it's named Laura, and there's a little bit of a nod to Canadian history here.
Yeah, it is. Canadians will know Laura Secord as a place for delicious chocolates and ice cream. But she was actually the heroine of the War of 1812. She would make her way over to the American side during the day, and the good thing about being Canadian is we can blend in pretty well, and knew and would pick up on intelligence from the American side in the War of 1812, and then late at night she would creep out and come and tell the British and Canadian and Iroquois soldiers what the plans of the Americans were. So we thought, well, she really was like an information line in the last major conflict between Canada and the United States, and here we find ourselves in a tariff war, and frankly, an information war as well. That if we're gonna name a bot that's going to help us sort through the intelligence, then Laura's a pretty good name.
It's interesting when we look at some of the chatbots that do exist today, and an area that we've certainly covered a lot on the show, and I have during my career, is the fact that most of them are coming out of Silicon Valley. Most of them are coming from some of the big tech titans. As much as people try to remove some of that bias, it's very difficult. Like Elon Musk has his Grok bot, which has a sense of humor, just like Elon Musk. Some of those things that maybe people don't want built into the chatbots that they're using to get information. So as you're building this and you look to some of the challenges, you mentioned some of them, but what do you hope to get out of this? How will people use this on a regular basis?
It's a great point. And so we're going to roll out a version 1 of Laura that we think will give people a window into fact checking themselves. I think it's something that, when I talk to friends, and I'm sure you do too, I hear quite often, like, I don't know what to believe anymore, right? Everything just seems to be questionable. I don't know who to trust. So what we're hoping to do, and there's some science behind this, people might be more willing to trust machine intelligence and human intelligence when it comes to fact checking. They may assume that the bias that humans bring to fact checking won't exist on machine intelligence. So there's actually a report out of Science that says that people are 20% more likely to believe an AI fact checker than a human one. So we're hoping that some of those people who still doubt, those people who are confused or lost in the amount of information that they're seeing, that they might say, I just want to know what part of this is verified, what part of this is less verified, so that I can judge for myself. And I hope it becomes a tool, frankly, a tool for information as the fog of war of information gets, much thicker. And then, one of the things we're going to try in version 2 is we're going to try using other LLMs to judge the work of Laura and see whether or not they can tell us things about her own bias that we can then prompt out of her. So we're going to put machine against machine and have sort of a death match over fact checking and see if that increases the reliability of Laura. And then we're asking people to be involved with Laura as well. Like, so, as you know, sometimes these language models don't return things that make sense to you intrinsically and naturally as a human. So it's important that we have a feedback loop, and we're saying, like, tell us when Laura has a hiccup, because this is the only way she's going to learn in the long run.
So I'd love to dive into the audience of people who you are going after, because from what I've read, it is not everybody. I mean, it is true that there are those people who are too far down a rabbit hole in terms of conspiracy theories. They will be difficult to reach. So can you break down who you hope to bring on this journey with Get Fact?
Sure. I mean, you're right. I mean, there's, on the left and on the right, there are just people in their tribes. They're not really interested. They're having a different kind of experience. They're having a community experience of like-minded people and aren't interested in really changing it. But there is a large cohort in the middle, 80%, that to various degrees that still have some doubt in their minds and understand that, sometimes the world is more gray than it is black and white. So we're aiming for those people. Now, they're not noisy. They're not the ones who are going to take me on, and they take you on, and they take everybody on. Our challenge is going to be to not be disrupted by that anger, and to remember that we're talking to the people in the middle who probably are quieter about their doubt and don't really know where to turn to sort that out. There hasn't really been, there's a lot of talk in the country right now about things we have to do, right? We've got to build pipelines, we've got to build infrastructure. There's a lot of talk, but one of the things that we really, we wanted to bring something to market. We wanted a product that people could use, that we would learn from, and see whether or not this moment in time in Canada, when there's a lot of opinion, there's a lot of talk, whether a tool and a place to think about misinformation might land. Now, we've done this exactly opposite of the way that most startups are supposed to do. I mean, you know this better than anybody. You get an idea, you try to sell someone on the idea, you get a little angel capital, you get some money up front. We are an all volunteer organization. We have spent maybe $200 to this point, and we're bringing a product to market that will land, we hope, if all the things line up, will land as a whole product. Now, not a mature product, that's for sure, because you only get so far on free. But we've gone to about 100 volunteers who have come to us and said, give us 3 to 6 months. Let's see if this idea finds an audience. Let's see if this tool is helpful to people. And then, I'm going to be knocking on a lot of doors starting in about a week and saying, look, you all know how important information is in the ecosystem here. You know that if people stop believing that things are true, that every business has a problem, right? Every business, the stock market, people won't know if it's real. I mean, you begin to detach from reality. So here is a product, here's a tool that you can use right now for free to see whether or not it helps. And will you support that in a philanthropic way? Because we're a nonprofit at this point. So we'll see. We'll see if anybody responds to it. But, the old saying, if you build it, they will come. Let's see. I'm not sure that'll happen.
I think you bring up a really good point, though, in terms of the erosion of trust that we've seen in our society today that's been happening over the past few years. One of the things that I think is worth noting is that there are some reasons that this is happening that are easy to quantify. We look at Meta, we see the fact that they're blocking news. We see that algorithms are, generally speaking, putting more hateful content and divisive content in front of people. But there is also a third factor that I've seen you write a little bit about recently, which is leaders who decide to weaponize some of this misinformation and disinformation, government leaders, or maybe some people in business. It is irresponsible. I think we both know that, spending a lot of time in the world of news. But when you have people who people traditionally have trusted and looked up to, who are now weaponizing this information, how much harder does that make your job at Get Fact?
Harder and easier. I mean, I think generally there is general distrust of authority in the country. And not only that, COVID made us quite conspiratorially minded. So people who are curious are doubtful. And that's a good thing. I don't know that that's a bad thing. Whether that's journalism, people don't trust news anchors the way they once did, business leaders. But I think it's become such a wash, and people have now drifted so far into distrust that our big bet is that they are looking for ways that they can learn to validate information themselves, because they don't really trust anyone else to do it for them. So, that's not the people on the edge that we were talking about, but there are people in the middle that are and they're just not sure how to do it. Like, how do you validate information? What are the sources? What is this stuff? And one of the good things about the bot will be it will kind of train people through using it in the process of verification that journalists like you and I have known and had baked into us for our entire careers.
I think it's impossible to look back over the past couple of decades and really blame one group of people for what is happening today. But I would really love your perspective as someone who's had so many decades working as a journalist, both here in Canada as well as the US, because I think it is true that news organizations have also been sort of slow to adapt to the realities of this time. I left mainstream media in 2005 out of frustration that they weren't really able to understand the effects that the internet was going to have on how people consumed media. So what do you think happened in terms of some of these large news organizations that I think it's fair to say have lost their way a little bit?
They did an experiment in exactly the way that you were encouraging them to do, and I was encouraging them to do. I went inside Bell Media as a digital news evangelist to try to, encourage experimentation. But as you know, it runs up against business models that they make money at, and they didn't have the imagination to believe that those business models would run out so quickly. And, people always act in their own self-interest. And so the attitude was mostly, well, I'll be out of here before like the real bad stuff happens. So why would I want to innovate? And they judged innovation the wrong way. They would only innovate if they could make money day one, and that just never happens, right? A TV show isn't a hit as soon as it comes out. Things need time in the content business, and they weren't willing to give it. It had to show that it could, if they were going to greenlight something, you had to have a business model they believed in that would earn profit year one. And if it didn't, then they weren't going to bother. Well, guess what? Almost nothing makes profit year one. It's new, right? Nothing. No business year one makes profit. And very few do anyway, because they're still feeling their way. They're not sure what they are. They're, all the pivots that you do when you're an entrepreneur to figure out, what's going to work. But the big companies, the ones who could most afford innovation, did the least amount of it. And that's why they are where they are.
Yeah, I think that is very well said. I think we've seen that historically over the past couple of decades, that those organizations have been slow to change, and nobody really had that vision for what the future of news looked like, which has been at the detriment, I think, to many Canadians in terms of how they're consuming their news. I wanted to also pull out something that you wrote because I think this is very Canadian. You're so humble in this comment when you say that I am haunted by the possibility there may be no way to succeed at it, as in what you're doing at Get Fact. I mean, that's a reality, right, in terms of what you're going into.
Yeah, it's our information environment's a mess, really is. And there are so many vested interests trying to fight for our attention. I mean, it's about attention control. And there are bots that are, LLMs are now creating misinformation between themselves to like accelerate the degradation of our information environment. So, these 100 passionate, patriotic volunteers may not be able to make a difference, but someone has to try, right? And that's kind of where we are. It's like we're if Canada is at stake, and how we see the country, and our ability to defend it in our own minds is about to be compromised by superpowers that have the ability to leverage all of their power to try to convince us that Canada doesn't matter, border's not real, all that kind of stuff. If you're not going to get off a couch in your house in retirement and say, not on my watch, I'm going to try something, then that's kind of where we are.
I love this. A few more questions for you before I let you go, just to wrap up this conversation. One of the things, just as you're speaking, that I was thinking about is just the magnitude of this problem. I've certainly over the years tried to raise awareness about these issues, whether it's with world leaders, friends of mine, startup founders, business leaders, because I think, like you said, it does actually affect everyone. Why do you think it is that some people have been lagging on taking this issue so seriously and giving it the attention that it absolutely needs?
Because it's invisible, and it's insidious, and it kind of creeps around. And I mean, we've seen it. I bet you everybody who's listening to this has a friend or two that suddenly you notice, oh, you're changing. Your ideas are changing. People that you've been close to all your life are drifting into conspiratorial thinking, and so it happens. It's not like a tariff, right? That suddenly cars are 25% more expensive. It's insidious, and so and governments have been reluctant to fund it. It was always a nice to have, not a need to have. Because they never admitted to the public how much of it is going on. It's like cyber attacks. Like, we don't have any idea, really. I mean, we know there's 1 billion attacks trying to destabilize Canada a day, but we never hear about them because companies generally don't like to talk about when they've suffered a cyber attack. So the general public knows it's there. They don't really understand how the battle for the hearts and minds of Canadians is on. and that there has been an information war now for about a decade, and that we are succumbing to it. And so I'm hoping, now that the threat to the country is existential, and that that really, other than the economic war, which is real, and you can see that there is a growing recognition that the information war is where we really do have to fight, and where we have to develop resilience in the population. And if getfact.ca can be part of building that resilience, so that you have a place when you doubt something you can go, then I'll go back to my couch a happy man.
Excellent. Just one or two more questions for you. When you look at the information landscape that exists today, are there any winners? I mean, is this an opportunity if some of the big media players have sort of failed at some parts of providing information to their audiences? Is there an opportunity for local news? Is there an opportunity for independent creators? Any winners in this fractured state of information?
I think podcasts are winners. I really do. There is clearly a hunger for meaningful conversation, and that the mainstream networks have stopped providing largely. I mean, when I was in, most of the podcasts they put out are just audio recordings of stuff they're already doing. They're not any genuine podcasts. So I think there's opportunity there. And you know what? These language models are solving all kinds of problems suddenly. We were speaking to somebody at Google yesterday. They gave us some startup credits. Thank you, Google. And they were saying there's just so many incredible businesses being built on these language models now to solve everyday problems and make things happen so much easier. So that's kind of what our inspiration was for Laura. Let's see if we can attach this brand new technology to an age-old and very current problem, and that's the verification of what's really going on. And we'll see if it turns into a business eventually. Maybe it will, but first we have to see whether Canadians are sufficiently doubtful to pick it up and go to Get Fact and see whether or not it's helpful to them and how we can make it more helpful.